on video? All right. Well, this morning we'll be talking in our message from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 through 8. And these are words that Paul wrote to his friend Timothy while he was in prison, chained to a Roman guard, shortly before he was to be executed by Nero. And so in verse 6 he says to Timothy, "You take over. I'm about to die. I will be on my way to heaven. This is the only race worth running. I've run hard. I have fought the good fight. Up to the finish, believing all the way. All that's left now is the shouting. God's applause. Depend on it. He's an honest judge. He'll do right not only by me, but by everyone eager for his coming." May God add understanding to the reading of his word. In the Jewish Talmud, it's suggested that to be considered successful in this life, you should either plant a tree, have a child, or write a book. Now, that's not meant to be taken in a strict literal sense. The deeper meaning is this, folks. It means that at the end of the day, be sure to leave something that's still here after you're gone. Something that outlasts you. Leave a legacy. Leave boldly. Be sure that you've exerted an influence for good in this life that lives on long after your days here on earth are done. Now, let me ask you this. When your days on earth are completed, how will you be remembered? When all is said and done, at the end of the day, when you leave, what will be your lasting legacy? When people think back on the donation of your life, when people reflect on the contributions that you've made, how will they sum up the full spectrum of your life? Tough questions. Well, this morning, we're bringing our 1 month to live message series to a close. For the past few weeks, we've been asking a single clarifying question that's helped us to focus on living intentionally, with passion, and with purpose. That question has been, what if you knew you only had 1 month to live? How would your attitudes, your actions, your schedule, your priorities, how would your life be changed? What adjustments would you have to make in order to have a no regrets type of life? The challenge we've been issuing in this series is, don't put it off. Don't delay. Start living a no regrets life right now. Today's message is about leaving boldly, and our focus is on how we can leave a godly, positive legacy behind to the generations that follow in our footsteps. When you think of this notion of leaving a legacy behind, what words or images come to your mind? A friend recently told me that he thought of the word impression, not as in first impression, but as in a lasting or an endearing impression. And he said that the mark that he saw that my father left on my life was to him that lasting type of impression. And he told me that he had a deep desire to leave such a mark on his children after he was gone from this earth. To leave a legacy like he thought that my dad had left in his sons. So when you think about it, today really is a great time to reflect on the idea of leaving boldly and leaving a legacy. Because Christ has left us a life-giving legacy. He has left us everlasting life because of what he did for us. Because he lived and died for us, here 2,000 years later, we're gathered to celebrate his life by receiving that new life that he offers to each one of us. Friends, that's a real legacy. Each week we have been looking at Jesus as the ultimate example of how to live with passion, purpose, and intentionality. This morning, we're going to shift our focus just a little bit by looking at the way the Apostle Paul left this world. Paul offers us a model for how we can leave a legacy behind, how we can leave boldly. As I said earlier, our passage from the Bible this morning contains Paul's parting words, written from prison just a few days before he was executed by Nero. Paul writes touching words to express his confidence in God and to reassure his friends and to summarize his life in one sentence. He says it so graciously. He says, I've run hard. I have fought the good fight up to the finish, believing all the way. So I'm going to use Paul's words to outline 3 points that I want to make in this morning's message. At the end of the day, we make our mark and leave a legacy if we, 1, fight the good fight. Now, the word fight in the original Greek is agon, from which we get our word agony. It means here that I have given my all. I have stood for righteousness and goodness. That's what Paul's saying. It's kind of like the picture of an athlete leaving everything on the field, so to speak, physically drained, but knowing that he or she has given their all. Paul is saying metaphorically, all that I am and all that I have given to Christ and to his service. I have fought the good fight. Many years ago, there was a movie entitled Stars in My Crown. Maybe some of you have seen it. It's an old movie. Look for it someplace on maybe Lifetime channel or someplace you might goggle it and find it where it's going to be shown or something. But it's called Stars in My Crown. And it's a story about an elderly African-American man who was a very devout Christian. Right? He owned a small farm in southern states outside of town. Right? Some precious metals were discovered on his farm, and everybody wanted them. Everybody wanted those precious metals. And they were pressuring him to sell his farm so they could get their hands on that value. But he refused to sell his farm because that farm had been homesteaded for generations by his family. And he just wasn't going to do it. But the people of that community refused to take no for an answer. In fact, they did everything they could. They criticized him harshly and openly. They burned down his barn. They even shot into his house. Eventually, they said, if you don't sell us your farm, we're going to hang you at sundown. Well, there was a minister in the community that had heard about this, and so he took his grandson and he went out to call on the elderly gentleman one evening. And while that minister was there talking to the man, a crowd of people came to the farm carrying blazing torches and wearing white hoods. The elderly African-American stepped out on the front porch and he had his Sunday best clothes on, showing no fear whatsoever. And he stood up in front of them and he said that, I'm ready to die. And I asked this minister to come out and hear and write down my last will and testament. And I want him to read that to you right now. And so the minister stepped up and the mob that had gathered was stunned when he started reading the will, because in that will, he left everything to the men standing out there in front of him. To the banker, he left the farm. After all, the banker was going to get it anyway, whether by hook or by crook, he was going to get it. To one of the men in the mob there, he left his gun. He had taught that guy how to hunt with that very gun. To another person, he left a fishing rod that he had taken that young boy fishing with several times. He literally gave everything he owned to those folks standing there in his front yard waiting to kill him. Well, the impact on that mob, as you might imagine, was just unimaginable. Seeing all that goodness and love right there standing in front of them, well, it just made them feel so bad that they just couldn't stand it any longer. In shame and in guilt, one by one, the entire mob quietly went back to their own homes. Now, while all of that scene was going on, the minister's grandson was kind of over on the side of the porch watching intently. After they left, the young grandson goes up to his grandpa and he says, "Grandpa, what kind of a will was that?" And the minister said, "That, my son, was the will of God." A wonderful movie, Stars in My Crown. What a great illustration that is. The will of God is for us to stand tall for what's good and for what's right, and to do so in the spirit of love and grace and mercy. That's what it means to fight the good fight. At the end of the day, we make our mark and leave a legacy if we fight the good fight and if we, number 2, finish our course. In Paul's mind, life is a race to run, and you don't stop until you've crossed the finish line. Notice that Paul seems to hint here rather strongly that each of us has our own particular course in life that we must finish. He says, this is the only race worth running. I find it most compelling that when Paul meets Jesus on that road to Damascus and has his life-changing conversion experience, he said, "Lord, what will you have me to do?" He didn't say, "Lord, what will others have to do?" No. And he didn't say, "Lord, what will others have me to do?" But rather he said, "Lord, what will you have me to do?" Folks, we're all in this race together, but we aren't racing against each other. We are in this race, this pilgrimage with one another. There's this really story. You've probably heard the story before about these two guys that are trekking through the woods, and they turn around and see a grizzly bear following them and kind of sniffing at their tracks. And so they know that there's about to be a race around here. And so one of the guys takes his backpack off, quietly takes off his hiking boots, and puts on a pair of running shoes. His friend says, "You know, man, you can't outrun that bear, not even with those running shoes on." And his friend turns around, looks at him and says, "No, you're right. I can't outrun him, but all I have to do is outrun you." Now, that's not the spirit in which we are to run our race. That's not about outrunning or outdoing one another. Being faithful in the Christian life, leaving a lasting legacy, is a matter of finishing our own course of obedience according to the will of Christ. Now, I can tell you, we've all been there. You will be tempted to quit that race soon. You'll be tempted to give up. There will be some detours that you'll be tempted to take, or you'll get sidetracked with lesser things. But we have to keep our eyes on Jesus Christ and never forget that we are headed to the finish line to complete our course laid out before us. And finally, my friends, to leave a legacy, to leave boldly, we must keep the faith. I think I've told this story before, but it really does bear repeating this morning, and I want to share it with you because it perfectly illustrates the spirit in which we have to keep the faith. A clergy friend of mine told this story once. He said it was one of the most difficult times that he'd ever faced. He was sitting at home in his lounge chair one day watching a football game or something, and his sister called. And she was screaming hysterically. She said, Nathan, you got to come quick. Something happened to Mother." And she hung up the phone. Nathan said he was just absolutely terrified. He didn't know what was going on. And so, without offering any explanation whatsoever, his sister just hangs up on him. So he runs out of the house, gets in his car, and makes the 200-mile trek to his mother's home. All the way he's thinking, what could have possibly happened? Did Mom have a heart attack? Did she have a stroke? Was there an accident? Is there a fire? What's going on? Why is my sister so frantic? But nothing that he was thinking could have prepared him for what he saw when he walked into his mother's house. You see, his mother, 73 years old, had had a home invasion. Someone broke in and beat her extremely bad. He said both of her eyes were almost swelled shut. They had robbed her, he had physically abused her, and there was blood almost everywhere. And then he said he did the only thing he could think to do. He just grabbed her and hugged her and cried. What else could Nathan do? And then something really strange happened. He said while he was hugging her, he smelled something. It was a familiar smell, and he kind of stepped back. He said, Mom, what is that smell? And she said, well, son, I knew you'd have a long drive, and so I fried some chicken for when you got home. He said the only thing he could do was grab her and hug her and cry again. And then he said the strangest thing. He said his mom kind of shoved him away, and she said, and I quote, son, I want to tell you something, and I don't ever want you to forget it. God is still good. She said it again, God is still good. And the third time she said it, God is still good. What a statement of faith that is. A mother, by her own godly example, encouraging her son, a minister in the church, not to lose faith. That, my friends, is a legacy. Folks, it's not the huge things that we do. It's not the things that we do when the spotlight's shining on us, when we know that everybody's watching. Rather, it's those little things that we do every day that define us and make us who we really are. And it is in being faithful in those things, in fighting the good fight, in finishing our own course, and in keeping the faith that we leave a legacy, that we leave boldly. If you knew you only had 1 month to live, it would be my desire that you do what Jesus did. He lived passionately, he loved completely, he learned humbly, and he left boldly. May God bless your life and mine. Amen. Amen.